Free and clear of the chatter from Wall Street, you're listening to Talking Stocks Over a Beer, hosted by hedge fund veteran and newsletter writer Mike Alkin, who helps ordinary investors level the playing field against the pros by bringing you market insights and interviews with corporate executives and institutional investors. Mike sifts through all the noise of mainstream financial media and Wall Street to help you focus on what really matters in the markets. And now, here is your host, Mike Alkin.
It's Monday, June 24th, 2019. Hope you had a good weekend. Had a nice weekend where I think I mentioned our really close friends lost their daughter in a car accident on June 8th. And so we've been spending a lot of time with them and trying to help them get through this just unspeakable time for them. And, it's interesting, right? Because you don't just listen. Because I sure as heck don't have the words to know what to say. Just console and listen and just be there for them. And God, there's no playbook for this. I always say with the parent playbook, there's no playbook. And then with this, like, my goodness, real life, real grown up, things you come across that are like, wow. So we learn on the fly. But besides that, we spent time with them this weekend. We did a barbecue and we had a little lacrosse tournament in our backyard and some badminton and a bunch of fun stuff. And my son who's 13, there's probably 12 to 15 kids always just playing lacrosse and in our yard, and so all these kids do is it's lacrosse, and so it's good. It was a good distraction for their other kids, and it was nice. Anyway, but I was driving my daughter and her friend to Soul Cycle yesterday, which is, I don't know if you guys, I think it's national. It's like spin class. We call it, when we were younger, it was spin class, but now they have a whole company around it and programs, and it's my wife and my daughter, they love it, and their friends, but driving them, it was about 20 minutes away, and I don't know why in that 20-minute drive we call them parkways, so they're two lane roadways, uninterrupted, no traffic. Other places are highways and freeways. Here they're parkways. So we're driving and I just, it hit me that you're driving, you're doing 60, 65, and you come across the guy in the left lane doing 45. And it just drives me bananas. And so, I talk about it, I talk out loud in the car and I tell the girls, what else? What else? And I got to think, what else drives you crazy? And I thought, it would be a good topic for the podcast, the things that drive you crazy. What are the things that drive you crazy? Right. And I was thinking about it. And so driving too slow, but that seems to be a common occurrence. People drive. Now, I don't drive fast. They call me grandma driver, but I do a little above the speed limit where I'm not going to get pulled over. I'm cautious, but it's constant. It's like people are driving and they just are completely unaware that you're on a highway, a freeway, a parkway, and you're doing 10 miles below the speed limit, which is bad enough in the right lane. But now you're in the speed lane. You flash your brights, maybe a little toot on the horn, friendly toot, nothing. Clueless. And then you go around them and I can't help myself. I stare at them and they just are oblivious. But it happens all the time. I got to think it happens to some of you too. Then the other thing that drives me nuts, the right turn into the driveway people on busy roads, and they stop. So you're going down. It's a main road. It's a busy road, and they're making a right into a store. And instead of making the right and driving and accelerating into the, slowing down and then driving into the turn, accelerating a little bit, they basically stop on the road, and it backs everything up. Drives me crazy. Then you're in the store, and there's an 18-year-old behind the checkout counter. You're doing some grocery shopping. I like to grocery shop. You say, Thank you. Have a good day. No problem. No problem. When a kid says to me, no problem, when I say thank you, it's like nails on a chalkboard. Who says no problem? Thank you. You're welcome. Have a nice day. You too. I didn't think it was a problem for you to take my money. That drives me crazy. Celebrity news. Do you care what Kim Kardashian ate for breakfast? The celebrity news drives me absolutely bonkers, and it's all over the place, right? You get pop-ups. I'm on ESPN or I'm on some website, and I something pops up. I don't care. I could not care less what they do. It's so trivial. It's so meaningless. Entertain me. I'll go to your movie. I'll watch your TV show. Leave me alone. Rap music. My kid listens. My daughter listens to country. Love it. My son listens to rap. I think I told you not too long ago. I went outside and he was playing music and they're dropping the F-bomb everywhere on the song. But it literally goes right through me. He gets in the car. First thing he does, puts on the rap music. And I can't even tell you how that again, nails on the chalkboard. Snapchat. If you have teenage kids, you'll know what I'm talking about. You're driving in the car, you're sitting there, you're sitting in your living room, you're at the kitchen counter or the kitchen table, and they're taking selfies of themselves and snapping it and then sending it around. And I ask, what do you do? Like, what is that? What do you mean? I have a streak going with so-and-so. What's a streak? Well, it's where you take a picture of yourself and you send it to a person and you keep the consecutive day streak going. Yeah, but you open your mouth, you look like a clown, like you're making funny faces. It's like, yeah, I know. That's a streak. But what's the purpose of it? Well, it's a streak. Mindless. Mindless, that's a business. But thank God we didn't have this when I was a kid. I'm not the sharpest bulb in the shed anyway, or in the pack, or the brightest bulb in the pack, but my goodness, I can't even imagine what would have happened if I had it then. People who don't say thank you in the store when you open the door for them. You're walking in, you see the reflection, the person behind you, it's a family, or it's an older person. Of course, I see the reflection of them. I step to the side, I open the door, and they just walk in. Say thank you. Or the guy who's walking in front of me, who opens the door and doesn't hold it, and it slams in my face. Drives me nuts. Yesterday, I'm online in the grocery store. Really nice people. I go to the grocery store, I go to the deli counter. You get cold cuts, lunch meat. It's called different things throughout the country. You take a number and you stand in there. And then there's the person, the grouchy older woman who's yelling at the guy behind the counter because she didn't get what her order was. This woman's New York accent was so thick it would nails on a chalkboard. You couldn't understand what she said anyway. Not screaming, but yelling at the guy, making everyone uncomfortable. What's the point? Just be nice. You got to go into a store. You got to go yell at the people there. Makes everyone around you uncomfortable. Stop. Now, by the way, on any given day, it could be the kid who says no problem, where I might say to them, I didn't think it was a problem. Or it could be a day where I just say nothing. Now, because it was an older woman, I wouldn't say anything. But if it was a guy, I might have to say, really, dude? Come on, the guy's he's making a living, he's working, he didn't hear you. It depends on the day. People who walk down the middle of the store, the middle of the aisle in the parking lot. You get out, you back out, you've got your stuff, you want to leave, and now there's the guy with the grocery cart, or walking right down the middle. oblivious to the fact that there's 3 cars behind him waiting. And he's got a 300-400 foot walk. And there you go. He could move to the left, could move to the right, but he doesn't. Drives me crazy. What else drives me? I wrote a whole bunch of stuff down. Winter coat zippers. They all suck. I was doing some cleaning out of our mud room. In our mud room, we each have our own locker. When we built the house, my wife gave us lockers, right? And then I have a separate closet. I don't know why, where my winter coats go and others spring coats. It's not just winter zippers, but I don't think I have anything that has a zipper that works. They all break. Is it just me, or does there need to be a better zipper? Drives me nuts. The people who always have to be right. I tend to insulate myself from them. You get to know them, you walk away. But, sometimes you can't help it. We have a thing called Promenade in town on Friday nights. All the vendors are outside and they have music and so on. And, it's when the kids are younger, it's pretty cool. But as they're getting a little older, we do it less. But when you go there, you're just walking up and down the street and you see people. And there's, that guy, you have to know that guy. You see him, you put your head down a little bit and he stops you because he wants to talk and he's always right. You can't avoid them. People who leave their trash on the counter at the fast food restaurant or at Chipotle. You watch the guy you're eating, and he gets up and he just leaves the stuff there. So for the next guy's got to come and clean up his mess. You couldn't put your wrappers on the tray, lift the tray, walk over like every other human being does, and put it down into the trash receptacle, so that the people in the store don't have to come out and do it. You don't inconvenience other customers. Drives me crazy. I could go on, but these are little things and I don't sweat the small stuff, and we laugh about it. Because I'm not one that I don't sweat small stuff things. I walk around damn pretty happy, but the one little thing yesterday of this driver going too slow, and girls laughing about me getting annoyed at it, and me just saying, well, there's a lot of little things. And so I sat down and started to write these little things, and I realized it's actually a lot of little things. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the 29-year-old freshman congresswoman that represents Bronx and the Bronx and Queens, not too far from where I live. She drives me crazy. On one hand, it's fabulous that we live in a wonderful country where someone who was a year ago was a bartender, and she represented her community, and she went out and talked to them and got them to vote for her. It's gone downhill since then. This woman has an opinion on everything. First of all, she's a complete socialist. But she's, in my opinion, on the fly when talking. Excuse me. I said, I am not the sharpest, brightest bulb in the pack. So I lay that out on the table. But I didn't run for Congress. She's there's no I don't think she is either. Yet she's so arrogant and so combative and so nasty with how she goes after people. She has an opinion on everything. She's got 4 million Twitter followers. I read her stuff on Twitter, and I just makes my skin crawl. I have to mute her now. because I just can't even, and I just have to ignore. But here in New York, she's local. It's always in the press. You can't avoid it. But she's part of the whole, and I'm fairly moderate, a little socially. I mean, I'm down the road. I can see both sides of issues. I think that help being an investor, looking at a bull case and a bear case. I'm not zealous on either side. I can see different points. I'm probably a little more leaning right, a little bit on stuff fiscally. Socially, I'm down the middle. But what annoys the crap out of me are the hardcore liberal-leaning left-leaning liberals who A, are nasty, and B, have to be belligerent in their words. And if you don't agree with them, you're a right-wing maniac. You're a bad guy. You're a bad person. Anyway, now that I got that off my chest, I'm sure I'll hear from a bunch of you on Twitter or in the emails I get about the things that drive you crazy day to day. And I went on Google. I Googled things that drive you crazy. There's thousands of lists, and it was pretty funny to read some of the stuff. So I realized, hey, I'm not alone. The day-to-day things that you just laugh at, they don't really drive me crazy. You just laugh at them, and I laugh at myself on all of these. I'm like, why do you let that bother you? Who cares? Let it go. And I do, and I move on, and you forget about it. But the good thing to know, though, is that my kids, I think I told you, when I talk uranium or nuclear power, it's crickets around here. They're like, okay, Dad, whatever. So yesterday I took my daughter's gluten-free, so there's a special bakery, and it's about 20 minutes from here. I was going to get my daughter some stuff. My son said, okay, Dad, I'll come with you. Actually, I didn't even ask him. He said, hey, Dad, could I come with you? I said, sure. Love hanging out with him. And so we're driving, we're in the car, and he says to me, Dad, and I'm not going to say his teacher's name. He says, Mr. So-and-so says that nuclear power is a really good thing, and that in a few years it's really going to turn around because we need it to save the planet. I said, they said that in school? Like, I just assumed everyone's liberal and they hate it. And he said, yeah, he was telling us all about it. I said, well, did you tell him that your dad runs a uranium hedge fund and nuclear power and all that stuff? He goes, no, I thought you just do uranium. I said, well, yeah, you know uranium's for nuclear power. He's like, I kind of thought that. I said, really? He goes, yeah, but no, Mr. So-and-so says this, that, and the other thing. I said, yeah, like, I guess I talked to a wall because I've been saying that for 4 years. He's like, oh, never really made the connection. Because I don't really always listen to you when you're talking about it. I said, oh. So then I spent the next hour with him. We got through the story. He was so intrigued. He asked so many great questions. And he asked about the economics of it. He asked about the safety of it. And it was great. So for an hour, I was talking nuclear power to my kid, and he actually listened and cared. And thank you to his teacher, because if it wasn't for his teacher, he'd still not be listening to me and caring about it. So that was good. Anyway, I got a direct message from someone not too long ago on Twitter, and he was talking about different aspects of energy. And he's a very bright guy, and I talked to him, and he had some good thoughts, and it got me thinking. He had a suggestion for a show, and I said, well, why don't you come on? He's actually our guest today. And but it got me thinking. I get a lot of people who ask me it got me thinking about my son saying, oh, geez, I didn't even realize the connection with you, uranium and nuclear power. Now he's a kid, so I give him a free pass on it. But I get a lot of questions because you can't, I can't just know about uranium. I can't just know about nuclear power. And to me, energy it all starts at the top with energy. And I have to work backwards, and I have to know a lot about a lot of different things within the energy complex to understand the role of nuclear, to understand working all the way back to uranium. You've got to know the nuclear fuel cycle. But a lot of my time is spent understanding the various aspects, the broad aspects of energy policy globally in the U.S. And when I see that, it opens up not only just in uranium, but in looking through all the different things, a lot of different opportunities, a lot of threats, a lot of ideas. And I thought, since I am asked a lot about how do you think about this, or how do you know that, or why did you say this, I thought maybe for the podcast over the next, I don't know, couple months will probably take, because I'm going to talk to you and walk you through kind of the different aspects of the energy complex. If you listen to the podcast, you hear me talk a lot about that I'm a geopolitical junkie, that I love geopolitics. But geopolitics is, it shapes everything. But if you think about what geopolitics are, it's really the battle for space and power that's played out geographically. And geopolitics encompasses a lot of different segments: the military, it's diplomacy, it's economics, and it's energy. And if you think about energy's role, it shapes every society, every modern society. It's been driven by natural resources and the trade routes that get them there. Right? The geography and the battle for land and the relationships developed and fought over, they're critical. Go back to the British Empire. Coal and steam drove the British Empire. Petroleum drove the rise of industrial America. Asia is now the driving force of growth in the world. I think over the next 20 years, 85% of the global growth of energy consumption is going to be in Asia. They already consume 25% of the world's liquid hydrocarbons. India's energy consumption is going to grow 130, 140%. China and Brazil over 70%. So it's a changing energy landscape. So what I'm going to start to talk about over the next several podcasts, and who knows where it goes, but it's really starting from the top, right? We're going to talk about the historical context of global and U.S. energy policies. From a historical context, we'll talk about currently what the landscape looks like, what it looks like. We'll touch on the changing global energy mix, and over time how that's evolved. I think it's important too, because these are the things that I look at and know. Understanding energy densities. It's an important concept to understand. How much energy do you get from a certain feedstock? Here we talk about shipping and energy for transportation, industrialization, power. We're going to talk about the role of petroleum, the geopolitics involved, and how that's evolved and is evolving in today's changing energy landscape. I certainly have to know a lot about the role of coal, where it came from, where it is now. It's a pariah, right? Guess what? It's growing. Now, as a percentage of the energy mix, it will decline over the next 20 years. But consumption is growing quite a bit. So the actual volume of coal is growing, flattish to growth, to a little bit of growth. Think about all these climate goals. Where's that play? We'll talk about how, like around the world, right? Everything coal. Why would I own a coal company? Well, some parts of the world, you get them for almost free. Yet they're growing. Talk about the history of nuclear power, where it came from throughout the decades, the role of it now, the role of it then, what its role is in a world concerned about clean air. I'm going to give you a little historical lesson on the evolution of environmentalist attitudes towards nuclear power, how they went from supporting it in the early days to opposing it and fear-mongering, and what motivates them to do it. That's going to be a fun one. I'm going to let it rip on that one. Then we're going to talk about the reality about the safety of nuclear power. We'll talk about the big three accidents, what really happened, and the real numbers behind it. And then we'll touch on along the way the economic challenges of nuclear power, construction cost delays, competitions from renewables, natural gas. Government attitudinal shifts towards it, some away and some towards it. More towards now, but you wouldn't know that. Talk about the new technologies. We're going to talk about Germany's disastrous commitment to renewables and away from nuclear. We're going to talk cold, hard economic facts, something the environmentalists don't like to talk about, or if they do, they skew it. We're going to talk about renewables, the economics of, the limitations of, the benefits and the challenges of it. There's a great role for renewables. See, unlike the far-leaning left who can't stand nuclear power, rather than being honest about it, there is a role for renewables. And it is going to be a much greater portion of the energy mix, but we're going to talk about the economics behind it. And not some overzealous agenda. We're also going to touch on the environmental hazards of solar waste, because it's coming. It's coming. Solar panels that are going to need to be discarded over the next few decades with lead and cadmium that wind up in the electronic waste stream. That's uncontrolled. We're going to talk about the real waste problem, and it's not nuclear. You're going to get a little bit of a lesson in that, and the bullshit that's thrown your way all the time on that. We're going to talk about the massive grid costs that will be required for the real rapid growth of renewables and how it gets stranded right now. Natural gas, right? See the commercials? Clean natural gas. We're going to put the numbers around that and bring truth to that. When you have a massive lobby and you have massive advertising from big oil and gas companies, they could get in your mind. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about natural gas prices and how regional they are, the role of liquefied natural gas and the opportunities it presents to transport it around the world, and how in some countries where it's just too expensive and cold is going to be the game. And maybe nuclear is there in certain parts. We know nuclear is in the developing world. We're going to talk about energy independence in the U.S., the American shale revolution. Is it real? Or is it short-lived abundance of oil and gas built upon the back of a glorified Ponzi scheme, if you will, where you just keep raising more and more money to keep drilling and keep losing more and more cash? Talk about the role of hydroelectric. You want to talk about real environmental disasters. When you're building one of those, or when one of those have a problem. We're going to touch on how transportation and the routes affect energy prices. Talk about pipelines, the geopolitics, and how they play a critical role in moving product around the world. So what we're going to do is open it up to the broad energy landscape. And within those, each segment, there are opportunities. And I'm going to share with you how I think about it, how my team thinks about it, and the work we do on it. and point you in the right direction if you're interested. You may not be. But it's I think if you're looking at something and drilling down on something as let's say like nuclear power, you have to know a lot of the other stuff that goes in and around it. You can't just know how many reactors there are, how many are going to be started, how many are going to retire, how much supply and demand of uranium there is. It goes way beyond that, because you have to try and project and forecast to the best of one's ability and understand the political climate in each of the countries that have them. You have to understand the role of China and Russia and what the Belt and Road Initiative is, and understand the geopolitics of what the Russians and Chinese are doing when they're trying to own the nuclear fuel cycle, as the Russians do right now. Why? What's the purpose of it? And in each of these things I just talked about, there are investment opportunities. Things are cyclical, not in all of them, but in certain parts of them, there are. There are things maybe you should avoid, things that are hyped up, things that are BS, right? But to the world of energy is everything. And because it's cyclical and goes to extremes and booms and busts, there's opportunity in that. And that's what interests me. I hope it interests you. If it doesn't, you won't listen. But anyway, so we're going to bring on a guest that is on Twitter. He is a private investor. He's retired. He's an interesting guy. I'm going to let him, when I've spoken to him before, I just let him go and let him talk. And he has a lot of interesting thoughts. He's not a professional investor, but he has a lot of interesting energy thoughts. And I find you'll notice once in a while I bring people on who are I don't want to bring on all professional investors. Once in a while I bring a CEO on to update you on something, but I don't like giving a lot of them the platform to just promote their companies either. I like talking to regular smart people who open up our minds to different things. And today's guest is one of them. So without further ado, Dale Haessel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
All right, man. So tell listeners, give us a little background on you. Where do you live? Where are you from? What did you do? I know that, but you tell them.
All right. Well, I was born in States. I was born in Iowa. And my father is an economist, and he was jumpy, right? He wanted to go here and there and there. So we moved every 3 years, basically. So it was on a 3-year cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So we lived 3 years in Pennsylvania. 3 years in Iowa, and then we moved to Ghana in Africa.
Yeah.
Stayed through 3 years there. And then we went to State College, to London, Ontario, because my father was an economist, so he worked he taught at Canadian, at the university there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went off to State College, Pennsylvania. So
Nittany Lions.
Nittany Lions, yeah. Joe Paterno.
Yeah.
Big news a few years ago.
Yeah.
Me too. So when we were in State College, Pennsylvania, that's when 3 Mile Island melted down.
Mm.
So so my father was getting all these calls from all his relatives about, how devastating it is, are you evacuating, yada, right? Mainstream media just bloats everything up, and I've lost all respect for mainstream media.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's 94 miles away from where the 3 Mile Island is. So we never even knew about it, except for the media is just harping on it, and people are phoning and whatnot, right?
Right.
And after that, we went to Kirkland, Quebec, because my father was working for Bank of Montreal. After that, we moved to Calgary, Alberta. So basically the headquarters of most of the oil and gas industry in Canada.
Yep. And a good rodeo too.
Yeah. The Stampede.
Stampede.
Middle of July.
Yeah.
Greatest outdoor show on earth. At least that's their slogan.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, so then I graduated high school in Calgary, and then I went to the University of British Columbia and got a degree in engineering physics. So then came back to Calgary and worked in the oil and gas industry pretty much for 25 or so years or whatever.
And what did you do? What did you do in the oil and gas industry?
Okay, so I worked in strictly software. So the first job, well, one summer I actually walked the lines of a Canadian Western natural gas line. So basically, in the old days, right, you would have these sensors which would track the gas line, and you'd be looking for leaks. So you'd basically look for patches of dead grass. So wherever there was a leak, the natural gas always looks for the path of least resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So it'd always come up like gopher, Richardson ground squirrels holes and whatnot, right? So you'd look for, so you'd put your sensor down you find a hole, right? You put it down and see if it reads any natural gas.
Right.
So now, of course, nowadays, right? I don't know if they're doing drones, but they should be using drones, right? So
right, yeah.
Just it saves so much money, right? Rather than having people go out and walk it a few kilometers every day, right? And cover the entire line, right? It's takes a lot of time and
people.
We'd have to stay in. So we'd go to like the High River, and they'd put us up in a hotel, not a hotel, but a motel or whatever, right? And so they'd have to supply meals and whatever else, right? So it's like a lot of expenses there. So after that, I worked on. So one other summer job I had there was with the Petroleum Recovery Institute, and it's basically a research institute, right? So they were the job I had was actually interesting, looking at the porosity of rocks.
Mm-hmm.
So without any annulus holes in the rock, there would be no trapping of oil and gas, or there would be no right. So the oil and gas is, people think of oil and gas as just something downhole, right? But you need it. It's actually held within the annulus of rocks. So if you have an imporous rock formation, you're not going to have any trapped gas, right? So you want to have pores, and the pores are in the rocks, and then permeability allows the movement of it. So if you want porous and permeable rocks in order to produce, they're the best producers, right? So even if you talk about in situ or ISR or ISL, it needs to have they're all in sandstone, right? So sandstone is porous in nature and whatnot, right? And you have to also trap, like oil and gas has to be trapped, so you need an impermeable layer above it to keep it. So now a lot of times you use seismic, and you can find a location and say, oh, there's a good chance of a deposit there. But the thing is, there could be a fault line or whatnot, right? And it seeps through the impermeable layer into a different zone or whatever, right? So you never know until you actually drill, right? So you can predict that there's going to be a deposit somewhere, but unless you actually drill it, you never know for certain. Same thing with uranium and whatnot, right? You don't know what grade it is or anything like that until you actually put down a hole.
Yep.
So after I worked for that company, I went on and worked for Halliburton and worked on a lot of drilling software there. And I started out actually in production software. And the interesting thing about production software is that every single state in the United States has a different reporting requirements. right? You can't even agree
Yep.
across the country, right? It would be so much, regulations would be so much simpler, right? If one report for every state, right?
Yep.
So every single state had a different reporting requirement. Same with Canada, right? We have, Alberta, it's like the royalty structures and whatnot. Alberta's is different from Saskatchewan, versus different from every province, right? So you have to, all your software has to be redundant. Like, it's like, this is what you need to report for this state, and therefore you need different input requirements for this state, and you need different input requirements for this state and whatnot, right? And it's a lot more overhead burden for every oil and gas company. And after I worked on that, I worked on engineering software for drilling. So learned a lot about the process of drilling and surface casings and different types of casing. And the one thing you learn about that is how much steel that an oil and gas company actually uses.
Yeah, it's so amazing, right?
One of my software I worked on was called Stress Check. So it would try to minimize the cost of the steel you're using. So when you drill a hole, you drill at, say, 9 5/8 inch hole, right? And then you put in a 9.5 inch casing, right? But you have a certain leeway in terms of how thick that casing is. So you could use really thick casing, right? Well, it's never going to fail, but then you're using extra cost.
Right.
And then same thing with all your other casings. So based upon the pore pressure and the frac gradient of the hole, you determine the size of the casing you're going to use. Also, you have to know if it's a sour gas well or not a sour gas well, for instance, right? Because the sour gas is always very corrosive, so it will eat through standard metal, right? So you want to so there's different grades of pipe, right? So there's different if you have vanadium in it or different components and whatnot, right? So you would have to use and each grade of pipe has different cost to it. So you can use high grade pipe, right? But it's going to cost you more money to case it. And so it was always about minimizing the cost, right? And the thing is, right, that's just for one well, right? These wells can cost millions of dollars, and every single well, right? And then you have extended reach wells, right, which can go for kilometers upon end, right? And the other thing you learn is there's there's sulfur production too and whatnot, the byproducts that you'd rather not have, right? And as you produce, the oil gas ratio starts to decline, right? So you're going to get less and less oil and more water, generally speaking, right? Because you're depleting your reserves and whatnot. The other thing is you learn enhanced oil recovery and various other methods to increase the lifetime of the well.
As you're talking, Dale, it's fascinating to me because you really started your career like walking pipelines, but now you've seen a technological revolution in the oil and gas industry and fracking, right? And so you've lived it, and it's so curious because there are those of us who have the school of thought, myself included, that and I'd love to get your view on this, that while we're seeing an enormous production, it costs a fortune, and they can't generate, or 2/3 of them can't generate free cash flow. And
I read that 90% of the companies in the Permian are losing money.
So talk to us about that from an engineer, from a guy who's developed software for drilling, and what's going on with this technological revolution the last 15 years. What's your view on fracking and sustainable economic production from a guy who's been involved in this, and like, how do you think about this? What you've seen take place?
Okay, well, let me think about that for a second. Well, I believe that I saw this movie called Gas. I haven't seen the movie Gasland, right? But I watched the movie Frack Nation.
Mm-hmm.
And basically all it does is refute all the arguments of Josh Fox, who basically lambasted the fracking.
Mm-hmm.
And because of his documentary, which won an Academy Award for Best Documentary, they had all these protests and whatnot about fracking. The problem here is that Frack Nation basically refutes everything, right? It's basically it's a fiction, because it's too boring, right? A documentary is boring, right? So you have to juice it up a little bit, right? Just like the media and everything, right? You got to juice it up, right?
Exactly. Like Chernobyl.
It's too boring, right? How am I going to win an Academy Award with facts, right? I gotta make it like the evil thing that it really is, right? Well, it's not evil, right? It's been happening for centuries, right? Like in Gasland, right? He was showing some water being put on fire, right? Because there's natural gas in it, right? But the thing is, right, that was happening in BC times, right? It didn't happen just because of fracking, right? It was happening all the time, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing and people always worry about contamination of the aquifers and water supply. The first thing that people have to realize is that you always put down surface casing, which isolates the aquifer from your well. Always, right?
Yeah.
They spend so much time and money on just being environmentally and reclamation costs, right? There's a lot of money spent on just community and trying to appease the communities and whatnot, right? For social acceptance of the process and whatnot. And what you find is that most farmers actually like oil and gas, right? Because most farms don't make money, or it's like the legacy that they've had for years, right? And they don't want to leave their farm and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
But oil and gas provides a lot of support for a lot of these farms, which would probably fold without oil and gas on their properties. So now, in terms of the fracking, right? Well, it is. I can't really explain why there is so much stuff being done in the Permian and losing money, right? It's just, the logic just kind of defies me. So I can't really explain. It's like, if you can't make money, you don't do it. That's my philosophy.
But from a software standpoint, from a drilling standpoint, from an engineering standpoint, have you done a deep dive to understand like why?
Not really.
Okay.
The depletion rates on these things is just astronomical, right? You just have to keep on drilling and drilling and drilling and never stop.
Yeah.
Because you decline at 60% or whatever in the first year. A lot of like ISRs, like in situ, right? They deplete pretty quick too.
They do. Yep.
I was reading like 70%, somewhere around 70% in some of these in situs. So you're gonna be doing the same thing. And the other thing, you're producing a lot of sand, which is very abrasive in situ, right?
Yeah.
Now, normally in a gas and oil well, they have sand controls, so they try to get rid of the sand before it hits the wellhead. So you don't produce as much sand.
Right, and not as abrasive and not as much money. It always comes down to cost, right?
Right.
So okay,
you don't want to produce sand, but in the in situ for uranium, right? You have to produce the sand because that's where the solvents and whatnot is all in, right? As far as I understand.
So now you're so you retired. You retired from the oil and gas industry, and now, what are you doing now? I know you're very learned. You're well read. You have a lot of different views on different things, and investing is one of them, and uranium is one that you've really caught on to. But so. How did investing come into all of this? How did that morph into it for you?
Well, I wasn't. I was just pretty much a passive investor for most of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, just did mutual funds and whatnot, right? And it was like, you're paying all these guys the management expense ratios, and they hide the fees and stuff like that. Right? It's like hidden fees all over the place.
Yeah.
And the thing is, right, like the first thing I do every day is like I get up and read my Bing, the Bing news, whatever the biggest items on there, and then I check Twitter, and there's just so much out there and whatnot, right? Yeah. And the one thing I learned, one thing I heard from a mutual fund advisor for Fidelity was they asked her what. If for your own money, excluding your mutual fund, what would you do for yourself? Not for the mutual fund, if just your own personal investing. And the interesting thing that the person said was, I would invest in the thing which had the worst return for the previous year. Mm. So basically, right, what goes up must come down, what comes up must go down, right?
Yep.
So if you follow that philosophy, you will never buy into something that's overhyped or over promoted as much, right? And you may have like, I'm going to invest in Bitcoin because it's down by 30%. Well, it might continue to go down by 30%. So you're not guaranteed of anything, right?
Right.
But you are guaranteed of never buying at the high if you buy something that's the worst performer in the previous year. Mm-hmm. So you can't. You're not guaranteed of 100. Nothing's guaranteed in life, right? But at least you're guaranteed of not being the worst investor out there.
Well, your interest seems to, as I read your stuff and you communicate with me, and it has I'd say an energy bent a little bit to where your interests lie, and obviously that would make sense. And you said something, when I was saying that you sent this. It was, the distortion of the markets through activism, and and I'm going to read for listeners what your thoughts were, and we're going to run with it. You said the new green ETFs and activist investors are distorting the markets. For instance, Norway Wealth Fund is selling off all fossil fuel companies. Banks like HSBC is rejecting lending to fossil fuel companies. Rio Tinto sold off all the coal projects. BP and other oil and gas companies are being forced into renewables. Fossil fuel companies have very low valuations given the fact that oil and gas demand continues to increase. Environmental lawsuits are being filed on every project, and you talked about the Japanese nuclear reactor that gets a green light, faces an injunction by lawyers working on a pro bono or basis to delay them. Salamanca, the uranium mine in Spain, talked about endless protests, and Keystone pipeline facing uncertain future. And many countries and cities are claiming climate emergencies. And these factors are causing changes and uncertainty to projects that would have been successfully done in the past to be questioned and many canceled. And you point out the new norm is for protesters to claim the necessity defense for criminal environmentalism, AKA saving the planet by criminal acts. You point to an article on theconversation.com. And then you went on and said, the green movement based on Mark Jacobson's 100% renewable using wind, solar, pumped H2O is driving a lot of this, although the science is sketchy and questionable. The problem is the voice of scientists like Patrick Moore and Judith Curry are overshadowed by the voice of Al Gore and Greenpeace. And the markets are being distorted and have been distorted for a while. And then obviously, think Tesla, right? The darling of the fun environment. And as you were writing that, before I even got to that, I'm like, yeah, well, Elon Musk. Even if the fundamentals don't hold, they will still believe in the dream of a clean tomorrow. And then you asked, will the political IPCC and activism be able to destroy the demand for oil and gas? Is there truly a paradigm shift, or is this a phase? Stock markets are based not on fundamentals, but what people's perceptions are, what you're willing to pay for something. And people are valuing clean things disproportionately to what they view as dirty and are taking actions to enforce dirty things become economical. However, driving things to uneconomical is also destructive to the economy. And you point out, look at Germany, Australia, who have escalating energy prices. And the penalty for distorting the market by changing regulations and adopting poor policies. And I thought that was a really fascinating take on things. And talk about your view of all of that, because I know from speaking to you that that's your view, and then you could kind of run with that. So how do you A, think about that in general, and then B, from an investing standpoint, how do you because you make a great point, right? The markets are being distorted, but things go on for a while. Right, so we can look at things. I look at Tesla and say, "You got to be kidding me!" I mean, who believe like it might produce less carbon emissions, a Tesla vehicle, which it does. Forget having the infrastructure that goes into and the carbon footprint of getting that car. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, they have a capital structure that is unsustainable, and that's the law of the jungle. That's the markets. And so how do you think about all that? And we're seeing valuations. I mean, you're an oil and gas guy. I look at the valuations in offshore oil and gas, and the service companies. You mentioned you work for Schlumberger. But these offshore oil and gas companies have been decimated. They trade for half of tangible book value. If you liquidated it tomorrow, you'd get a huge increase. So
if they just sold off all their assets, it'd make more money than their market cap.
Exactly. And and eventually, and what happens is you tend to see so right now, because of fracking, right, and U.S. energy independence, all these offshore projects have been put on the shelf, $1 trillion worth over the last several years. But eventually, they're going to need to be there. You can find really great values.
I think one of the things which is driving that is the short cycle. Because you can get production in such a short time through Permian, right? Because you'll get production within a year, versus an oil and gas multi-billion-dollar offshore plan will take years to get production, right? And I think a lot of the oil and gas companies are scared from the 2015 or so, where the price dropped enormously, and they don't want to commit the huge amount of capex which is required for these offshore projects. I was reading this thing called motivated reasoning, because there was a very good article on Twitter, right, which is what I get most of my ideas from, right? So the definition of motivated reasoning, which I'm going to read here: motivated reasoning is an emotion-based decision-making phenomenon studied in cognitive science and social psychology. The process of motivated reasoning are a type of inferred justification strategy which is used to mitigate cognitive dissonance. When people form and cling to false beliefs despite overwhelming evidence, the phenomenon is labeled motivated reasoning.
Wow.
And I think that is so true these days, right?
Yeah.
There was this one case where I was reading about an offshore driller. They couldn't get to site, right, because the protesters were blocking the exit for the whatever it was, right, a jackup rig or a semi-submersible, whatever, right? And I was reading Transocean had a contract, I think, with BP or whatever, right? The day rate of the rig is $455,000 per day. So I'm thinking to myself, just that one action of keeping that drill ship or whatever from getting to site for one day is a $455,000 cost. Now, you take that, and then you have to, in terms of your GDP, right? You have to take that and then add in the employee wages and whatnot. It goes into that, right? And then that comes back into the economy, right? You're costing the economy like $500,000 a day just in that one action.
Yep.
And then you have all these protests over pipelines. Like, we cannot get our oil to market in Canada. It is, and these things are these NGOs that aren't even in Canada. They're putting money into blocking our oil, right? Because most of the money comes from the U.S. to stop us from getting to market. The thing is, right, and I was reading in Minnesota, right, where the Chamber of Commerce is opposed to the Line 3 replacement, right? So this line, which goes from Alberta down to, I'm not certain where it goes down to, but it goes through Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And the Chamber of Commerce is opposed to the line, right? So basically, we have a line which is running at half capacity because it was built in the 1960s. So it's a 60-year-old line, right? Mm-hmm. The oil is shipping across Minnesota every day, and they can't replace it. They're like, well, the Chamber of Commerce is opposing it, as well as the Democratic governor, on the grounds that, well, there could be a leak, right? Well, and whatnot, right? And because they believe in their ideology, right?
Right.
But if you think about it, right, every time there's a leak, it's obviously front page news. They report it in only liters, not barrels, right? Because barrels is too large of a quantity. Yeah. And the thing is, right, across the United States is producing around 12 million barrels per day, which is around close to $400 million barrels in a year. Mm-hmm. And you have a few leaks of like 20, 30,000 liters. That's nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. And the thing is, it's so pipelines are so safe, right? And every time there's a sewage leak, right, there's no reporting of that. In Canada, there was 20 herons that died because of they landed in a tailings pond, right?
Yep.
Now these and there was $1 million plus fine or whatever to Suncor for landing in the tailings pond. Suncor and all these companies spend a lot of money on air horns and whatnot and trying to keep the birds out of the tailings ponds, right?
Yep.
It was $1 million fine, right? You kill 20, 30, 40 birds or whatever on a wind farm, right? It's nothing. No reporting whatsoever. It's front page news if a tailings ponds does it. And the thing is, right, what about all the tailings ponds for Rio Tinto and all these other companies, right? Never even mentioned. Never mentioned, right? It's like, there's got to be birds that are killed in all these open pit mines all over the world, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And yet only oil and gas gets front page news and whatnot, right? I look at it as like the people who protest, right, are obviously the locals. And the thing is, these locals don't realize that they are hurting their own economy. Mm-hmm. They think they're doing something like they're for the greater good, right? Yep. And yet there are people in the city that you're protesting in Vancouver, right, or wherever, mm-hmm. right? And it doesn't make 1 ounce of difference in terms of the world of your actions. Not 1 iota. You think you're doing so much good, and yet you're destroying your own economy, for starters, right? You're not destroying somebody else's economy. You're destroying your own economy.
Yep.
The oil and gas is going to make it to market somehow, regardless of what you do. It's going to be shipped by railway, or it's going to be shipped by a different pipeline or something, right? It's going to get to market. And the world has a certain supply demand, right? Mm-hmm. And the demand is there for the product. It is going to be consumed. Whether it's produced in Canada, or it's produced in the US, or it's produced in Saudi Arabia, it will get to market somehow. And basically all you're doing is destroying the Canadian economy by protesting it. The money would go back into the economy through taxes and whatnot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the Canadian. I mean, you live up there, and you've lived you've lived all over, but you're a Canadian citizen, and your dad was an economist, and I know from talking to you, you have an interest in all of that. So what's your take right now on the Canadian-U.S. relations and economics and trade, and how are you thinking that through, and how does that get expressed in how you make investment decisions?
Okay, well, I'm of the opinion that free trade is a win-win situation.
Mm-hmm.
And Donald Trump, for every good thing he does something asinine. He absolutely has no business sense whatsoever, as far as I could tell, right? Mm-hmm. The thing is, right, free trade is a win-win situation, right? For instance, if we have no trade, well, how are we going to get bananas or whatnot, right? We can't produce it locally, right? Mm-hmm. And in terms of oil, and in terms of his steel, right? Mm-hmm. Well, steel is an input to an end product of manufacturing. So if somebody wants to subsidize their steel, I say go ahead. We will import it at a cheap price and build a whole bunch of stuff with it, right? Now it hurts a local industry of just steel, right? So you're being protectionistic by any type of tariff. And the thing is, right, I actually wanted Donald Trump to actually be tough on Canada. It's like, what? You want them to be tough, right? Well, when they're negotiating NAFTA, right, renegotiating the trade between Canada and the U.S., right? Mm-hmm. I'm in the West, right? We don't produce any dairy products,
right?
So I want cheap yogurt and cheap milk and whatever, right?
Yeah.
It's like when Donald Trump backed down and gave, a 5% reduction in quotas in Canada. It's like, oh, come on. I want 100% reduction in quotas. It's like most people in the U.S. would rather zero tariffs on oil and steel and aluminum, right? Because more of the U.S. economy is based upon manufacturing with it, right? Every car, every pipeline, everything is all based upon steel and aluminum, right? So mm-hmm. All your soft drinks, whatever, it's like it's more detrimental by putting these tariffs on it than not having the tariffs on it, in my opinion, at least.
Yep.
And then again, like I don't understand, like why and the softwood lumber, right? It's like, if I was negotiating, right, I'd say, or if I was Canada, right, it's like, because there's so few actual dairy producers in Canada, like it's around 100, right? But like the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? They make so much noise, right?
Absolutely.
It's like I would, if I was a negotiator, I'd say, remove your softwood lumber tariffs against Canada, and we'll open up our dairy industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like the thing is, right, the softwood tariffs just hurt anyone who uses any wood in the United States, right? Every time you build a house or whatnot where you use any wood, right, it's going to be more expensive because you have a tariff against Canadian lumber. And it's not like Canadian lumber is subsidized or whatnot, right? It's just a different way of produce, different structure, right? It's not It's not subsidized. It's just the biasism of the U.S., right? Because the lumber industry in the U.S., right, obviously has some pull, just like the steel and aluminum industry obviously has some pull, right? And he makes these decisions, and nobody knows what he's going to decide until you hear the latest tweet that he comes up with.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So just from listening to how you think of a lot of different things, you like alternative news. The thing I read to listeners earlier about the distortion in the markets through activism, but distortion through through perception, and perception for a while in the markets is reality. And obviously, by being an investor in Sachem Cove, you're a contrarian. And so, as you're you're retired and you're well read and you're learned and you invest now, how do you translate those thoughts that you have on these different things? Because there's what should be and what is. Right. And so how do you translate that into your investment philosophy and your investment thoughts, to where you recognize something's misvalued, but yet that valuation at some point has to be realized, right? We know in the case of uranium, we think it's uncovered needs that's going to cause a contracting cycle and so on and so forth. When you look at some of these other things, how do you say, okay, this is just wrong? But I'm looking for investments that are going to capitalize on that in a reasonable period of time.
Well, I'm pretty passive in terms of investing, right? It's like I don't like to make knee-jerk decisions, right? I believe that there is no such thing as timing is impossible. It's I also think of things like I a lot of times I think something is going to happen, but yet I don't act on it, right? You have the two people, right? You have the fear of missing out, right? Where people just the
FOMOs.
Rumor comes out, right, and they have to invest or whatnot, right? And the people who want to, they can't hold a stock for more than a weekend.
Yeah.
Versus me is like, okay, I'm just like, I don't want to. I hate kind of selling stuff, right? Now, of course, you should sell stuff if the fundamentals change. Like you can't hold on to something if the fundamentals are against you. But I also think that at the end of the day, you should be making money, right?
Yep.
Some of these companies that never make money is or have no future of making money, right? Then you shouldn't invest in them, right? It's like you will never get a dividend, you'll never get anything. It's just it's a losing proposition.
Right.
It's the same thing with most of these Permian producers. It's like these guys don't make any money. It's why would you invest in them?
Right.
And I look at companies like Suncor, right? They made $1.4 billion in Q1. Not even Q2, not even for the full year. $1.4 billion. And yet their stock is sucking. Right? It's like, and it's just, you have all these companies which make no money, and they're all these technology stuff, right? Like I don't invest in it. I don't believe in investing in anything that's overhyped or over promoted. It's like I don't understand. Like Warren Buffett says, you should only invest in what you actually understand. Right? Like I don't understand crypto. It's like why would I invest in it? I don't understand. I understand the allure of stuff, right? Like cannabis, right? Well, it's a whole new market and it's going to do everything else, right? But everyone's in that space, right? And who cares? Like it's an addictive drug that that people will be consuming regardless of the regulations. And they've found out that even though they have legalized it in Canada, for instance, right? The market of the illicit stuff is still there, right? Because then they don't have to pay the taxes on it and bypass the entire, the government thinks, well, we'll legalize it and we'll make a whole bunch of tax revenue on it. Well, a lot of people just want, still going to use the illicit stuff anyways, because then you bypass the taxes and the controls and everything else anyways. So I avoid anytime I see something that's just overhyped, right? I always think like, when Bitcoin was going up like 100,000% per month or whatever it was, right?
Yep.
It's like, oh, well, it's, people should be shorting this, not buying it, right? And the thing is, right, there's a lack of critical thinking, I think, in the world, right?
Yep.
And I think that happens with a lot of this climate change. The 12 years before we're doom and gloom, right? It's like as FDR said. Let me quote him here. Okay, here we go. The only thing we fear is usually fear itself, right? So it's all being fear mongering. All this, like, to me, as technology is always advancing and always improving, and the government's always choosing winners and losers all the time.
Yep.
And the government is a very poor chooser of winners and losers. For instance, right, when Obama basically paid off 100% of the losses of these companies, right? It's unfathomable to me, right? Because you're basically paying off these companies because of their incompetence. So you had some companies which did not invest in the subprime loans, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you had other companies that did, right? The companies who did obviously didn't do their due diligence, and they were greedy. Nobody got thrown in the slammer for the fraud, except for a guy in Iceland. Go figure that the only guy responsible for all the subprime is one guy in Iceland. But the thing is, right, to me, it's like these Charles Schwab and whatever these other Goldman Sachs or whatever who are promoting these things. That to me, that's fraud. It's actually like going against the best interests of your investors, right? It's like you're supposed to be making money for these guys, and you have internal audits and internal memos that says that this stuff is going to zero, right? And yet you're pushing it. You're pushing it knowing that it's a bad investment. And the government then rewards all these companies for their fraudulent behavior by bailing them out at 100%. Now in Greece's case, right, they got these people were giving them money, right, even though their debt to GDP was like at 50% or higher or whatever, and they were just giving Greece money because they're getting good return on their investment, right? Well, then Greece defaults and says, well, we're going to give you 50 cents on the dollar. Like if Obama was going to bail these guys out, he should have given them 50 cents on the dollar, not 100% bailout. And or the better alternative is to reward the companies which didn't do the fraud and didn't promote these things, right? Oh well, why give money to Charles Schwab or Goldman Sachs when we give it to this other company that didn't do it, right? We're still putting the money back into the economy. It's just not to you guys,
right?
It's like when you bail out a given car company, right? Well, there's Chrysler, there's Ford. Well, you're bailing out the guy who's incompetent. You always bail out the incompetent guys, not the competent guys. It's like because the competent guys don't need bailing out.
Absolutely.
It's like Donald Trump went bankrupt 7 times, right? Like most really good investors don't go bankrupt ever. Like how many times has Warren Buffett gone bankrupt? 0.
Yep.
Most people don't go bankrupt. Even normal people don't usually go bankrupt. And the thing is, right, I was reading about Donald Trump, right? And I was reading that he would have more money. His net worth would be more if he did no investing, right? Because he inherited like 800 million or whatever from his father, right? If he just put in like the S&P and just let compounding interest make him money, just doing nothing, he would be better off, right? Because he made money and lose money all the time, right? Whereas if you just follow the the S&P, I'll go up and down, right? I always look at the economy as like a ship.
Yep.
Like the stock market generally goes up, right?
Mm-hmm.
But not linearly, right? It'll go up and down and through cycles, right? But it's like a ship steering its way up river, but with little ups and downs along the way. And you know, that's the way people can make money, right? Is compounding returns, right? It's about getting your money in early and letting it grow. People wait till they're like 50, 60, right? And then decide to invest, right? Well,
Yeah.
you lost the compounding interest of like 50 years or 40 years, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing we were talking about philosophies, right? It's like a lot of people are chicken, right? They're afraid of losing money, right? And they always, they put into a GIC or they put into collecting interest, right?
Mm-hmm.
But most people don't realize that the real rate of the nominal money, right? Like any interest rate you ever earn, right? You have to subtract off the real rate, the inflation, in order to determine your real rate of return on your investment. And most people don't even think about that, right? So if you're getting your 0.5% from the bank to put your money in there, yet your real rate of interest is negative, right? People don't realize that they're actually not making money by having the money in the bank, right? Because the bank lends it to you at 0.5%, then they loan it back out to somebody else at 1%, right? They're making money on it, and you're losing money,
right?
And a lot of people don't think that, right? Oh, I made this much money or that much money, right? But you lost money, and that's the advantage of low rate inflation, right? It's the one of the main components of your GDP or whatnot, right? Is investment, right? So investment is inversely related to interest rates.
So I know you are an avid chess player.
Yeah.
How does chess help you in investing?
Okay. Well, I think you have to. I find that the most dangerous opponent for like a higher rated player is one who has no fear. So if it's like you had hammer investing on there before, right?
Yep.
And it's the same thing with chess, right? The really strong players will bully the weaker players, right? Same thing with having a big stack versus a little stack, right?
Yep.
You push the guy around, right? So the little guy, right, is like afraid of the big guy, right? And so he backs down, right? So what happens in a lot of chess games is that you just get a little bit of an advantage, right? And you push it, right? And the big guy pushes and pushes and pushes and gets bigger and bigger and bigger advantage, right? And the most dangerous opponent is one who has no fear, right? Who will push back. And it's the same thing with investing, right? Is if you are, I think you want to, like, there's a risk reward relationship, right? And most people are chicken, right? And they don't want to have the they can't. You have to be able to sleep at night, right? But you have to be able to have a little bit of be able to take a little bit of risk in order to actually make a return on your investment. And without having any risk, you'll just put into into the bank, right, and just leave it there, right? You're gonna have nothing on your money, right? But
right,
ideally, you should move your money between the different asset classes in order to, right, when interest rates are high, then the stock market doesn't do as well, and and vice versa, right? But you know, I'm just like I just leave. I'm too lazy to you know, move between bonds and whatnot, right? So I just leave it all in equities 100% of the time, right? Ideally you have some cash in order to be able to take you know, buy on dips, right? But
Right.
you know, I'm just like right now I'm just fully invested in like, because I believe in the current situation. The uranium space is just unsustainable. So
Me too. Me too.
yeah. Well, you can't have it at I can't have the price of uranium at $24.
Yep.
You just can't.
It
It's
just
like
doesn't.
has to change, right? No
Yeah.
matter what you do, it has to change.
Yep.
And so it's like, well, I could put it in cash and then hope that things drop even more. But I've been of the opinion that it's supposed to go up like the last since I was hearing your 2017 speech on uranium. That, like, after I heard that one, then I did more investigating, right? And the thing is, with everyone in almost every, you know, physicist and whatnot is all pro-nuclear anyways, right? It's like that's a fundamental of physics, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like I was already pro-nuclear and already, and I'd already gone through 3 Mile Island, right? And I already knew it was ridiculously overhyped, the damages of it. And so I was already pro-nuclear already at that point, and I was just like, you know, okay. And then I read the Smith Weekly, right, and with the nuclear report there, and so I, you know, and also, to me, it's the although I don't believe in all this climate garbage, right? I know a lot of people do believe in it, and so I believe if you truly believe in that, you have to support nuclear, and so. You know, even though it's against my beliefs in this CO2, you know, you can't fight fight the crowd, right?
Yeah.
You'll always lose, right? The easiest thing is just to agree with everyone, right? And there's no critical thought process out there these days, right? It's like, okay, everyone's saying that we have a climate emergency or whatnot, right? If everyone says that and everyone believes that, right? Well, you can't. You're fighting against an immovable force, basically, right?
You could call it mindless investing, right?
What?
Mindless investing when people are going with the crowd.
Yeah, and it's certainly the easiest, right? Like, nobody's going to argue with you if you say, oh, well, 97% of scientists believe in global warming. Nobody's going to argue with you if you just, because everyone says that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the thing is that I find astounding, right? If the climate is settled, that statement right there drives me batty, because the science is not settled on almost anything, right? For instance, right, everyone, Newton came up with gravitational force, right? G m squared, m1 m2 divided by radius squared, and it was everyone believed it, you know, and it was the status quo. And then they refuted it in the quantum level, right? It's Newtonian gravitation does not work at the molecular level, at the quantum level. Absolutely fails. Right. And then you know about multiverse versus string theory, right? So, for instance, the show Big Bang Theory, where Sheldon Cooper is a theoretical physicist studying string theory, right? Well, there's two camps in physics, right? There is the string theory camp, and then there's the multiverse camp. And the thing is, both theories cannot be right. They both oppose each other. Right. So so if you're a physicist, right, and you're doing string theory, right, it's like, well, it's over 50% chance you're probably wrong. And same thing with the other one, right? Because it could be neither of the two, right? So it's like you're spending all your time developing a theory that, the science is unsettled, right? Because they can't both be right. And the thing is, the CERN found the Higgs particle, right? Higgs boson. So the big thing about that was the reason why it was so big is that this Higgs boson was supposed to eliminate one of the two theories. So if the weight of the Higgs boson was over such, right, it would eliminate one theory, and it would, or if it was under, it would invalidate the other one. The thing is, it came in between the two, right? So both theories are still around, right? And so the science is completely unsettled, and so the thing is that in terms of on the astronomical level, that astronomy level, Newtonian mechanics still applies, right? But the problem is that the numbers don't add up. So they had to invent dark matter to have the numbers add up. So it's like a fudge.
Yeah.
Fudge in order for the numbers to work, right? Because you can't find this dark matter, right? But if dark matter didn't exist, all the universe would just expand much faster. But somehow the universe is being held together, and so you need this hidden mass to justify the situation.
So it's a plug number,
right?
Yep. Which you see a lot in investing with narratives too, and you see where people have a narrative and they need to support that narrative, and they can plug, however you want to do it.
And the same thing with climate, right? It's too complicated for any model, right? So I was reading this. Edward Lawrence was doing climate modeling in the 1950s and 60s. So, obviously with the old computers with, the punch cards and everything else, right?
Yep.
So,
you're bringing me back to my Fortran days in college. So.
Oh yeah, I did some Fortran coding.
There you go.
Well, everything in engineering was originally done in Fortran, right? So Fortran was the language of engineering.
Yep.
Just like COBOL was the language of business.
Right.
So there's a lot of business applications which were written in Fortran, and they still use Fortran actually in some of the like the Halliburton engineering software, right?
Right.
It's not the same as your Watt 477 or your Watt 5, right? It's now like digital Fortran, but Fortran is still around.
Yeah.
Just not as much. So he was doing this climate modeling, right? He was using 12 parameters or whatever, right? And he came up with this chaos theory, right? Which means that a slight deviation of the initial inputs would have a dramatic effect on the final results. And the problem with all these climate models is that they all run hot. And it's all like binary, right? Most of these models are like CO2 makes climate change. End of story, right?
Right.
There's no nothing else. Like the narrative of all these people, right, is CO2 is the devil, right? It's like, well, and so they justify all this renewable stuff by CO2, but CO2 is the giver of life, right?
Yeah.
There would be no plants, no animals, no nothing without CO2, right?
Yep.
Well, you could probably get some animals at the bottom of the sea without any CO2, right? Because they live off of heat vents. But just normal life on the surface, right, wouldn't exist. And also CO2 creates these CO2 sinks, right? Yep. And the CO2 sinks being obviously the plants. The plants suck up CO2, right? And the thing is, it drives all these policies. and there, to me, it's like the science is unsettled, right? And yet you're doing all these policies and regulations for something that is not necessarily proven, because none of these models can. There's a saying, right? Is that if the model does not mirror reality or actual, the model is invalid.
Right.
And none of these models can model the Ice Age. Why was there an Ice Age, right? Like, you need to be a model needs to be able to predict the future, but also explain the present and the past.
Right.
And none of these models are able to do that because and the thing is, right, a lot of people, and the entire premise of greenhouse gases is all based upon Venus, or I think it's Venus, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's abnormally hot, right? But their atmosphere and all the other variables is non-existent there, right? Mm-hmm. There's no water, there's no jet currents, jet streams, right? There's no, the Earth has tilting, right? Right. The Earth tilts it in a cycle, right? The sun has cycles as well. Mm-hmm. To me, it's the science is unsettled, and you listen to somebody like Patrick Moore, and he's saying the amount of CO2 in the past was higher than present, and yet the temperatures were cooler. Mm-hmm. So that goes against every single thing that all these, this Greta and all these other people say, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just, it's, to me, it's like, let the economy do its whatever, right? Regulate pollution, but don't call CO2 pollution, right? So now you could get, I think CO2 can maybe cause maybe a little bit of acid rain or something like that. But other than that, right, CO2 is not detrimental. But sulfur monoxide and carbon monoxide and whatever else, regulate all that stuff. Regulate the particulate or whatever, right? Yeah. But, leave that alone, because the way I see it, right, is that we can always use technology in the future to solve these things. Like, I think mankind is adaptive enough, mm-hmm. and able enough to adjust in the future, mm-hmm. versus destroying your economy. Because if you have two countries, right, country A and country B, one country has all these environments and is all anti-CO2, and you have another country that doesn't care. The country that doesn't care is going to have a GDP and a standard of living much higher than the country that cares. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's like the economics just doesn't justify it, right? Like, and you have countries that produce like no CO2 in their production of electricity, like Norway and Iceland. And so they have a huge economic advantage over all these other countries, right? It's like, I don't know, it's just, doesn't make sense, right? Like, and the judges these days are so powerful. Mm-hmm. As I was saying before, right, is that if you don't agree with a judge, go find another judge. It's like in Japan, right? They'll file an injunction in one prefecture, right? Yep. The judge will reject it, right? They go to the next next judge, and he accepts it, right? It's like,
Yeah.
and
Keep chopping it.
Yeah, exactly. And same thing with oil and gas, right? It's like with a pipeline, right? Find another judge.
Yeah.
There'll be some judge who will agree with you, right? Because it goes down to motivated reasoning, right? As I said before, right?
Yes.
One judge will be biased because he believes in climate change and is trying to do good by the world, right? There's no such thing as 100% objective, right? There's always a subjective component of everything, and the thing is, right, these judges, right, will reject the regulatory agency, right? It's like, what's the judge know about nuclear fission and nuclear reactors and nuclear whatever, right? And they're making decisions on these things, right?
Yeah.
They know nothing, right? Well, the regulator is supposed to know what they're doing, but yet the judge and the environmentalists don't care, right? It's like, just file an injunction, right? And the thing is, right, it costs billions of dollars to your economy by all these frivolous lawsuits. It's like these class action lawsuits, like the Roundup and the talcum powder, right?
Yep.
They've done the studies and whatnot, right? And the correlation is very is not 100% proven, right? But yet everyone feels sorry for these people, these victims.
Yep.
And yet there's no actual physical proof that it was that, right? People get cancer. It doesn't mean that Roundup caused your cancer just because you used it, right? Oh, I got cancer, I used Roundup. Oh, well, Roundup's the issue, right? It's like so people.
Well, and it's interesting because you're a technology guy, you're a science, physics guy, so you're very science fact proof based.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
I want if the science proved it, then prove it. But the problem I have with scientists these days, right, is that they're all motivated to prove something. Yeah. All the scientists from the IPCC, they have only one goal in life, is to prove that climate change is real, right? Well, climate change is real, but the anthropological part of this climate change is questionable, right?
Yep.
You have no purpose in life except to prove it, right? You're going to prove it. You're going to cherry pick your numbers and whatnot and prove whatever you are. And these scientists are all get grants and whatnot, right? You can't get a grant as a scientist to show that there's no global warming or global cooling or whatever, right? Right. They did like I was reading on Twitter, right? It's like, okay, if you're going to want to study something, right, you put climate change in its title, right? So if you want to get a grant for the migratory patterns of the swallow or whatever, right? You say, how is climate change affecting the migratory pattern of the swallows, right? And then you get your grant, right? It's just too boring. Just say the migratory pattern,
right?
Or something, right? It's like climate change these days. You have to, you are an outcast if you do not agree with mainstream media and politicians. Politicians think they know everything as well, right? It's like I always, these politicians like AOC or AOC, right?
Yep.
They think they know everything, right? It's like you guys have no science background whatsoever. In Canada, we have this person called Climate Barbie, right? And she basically says, the louder you say it, the more people will believe you.
Oh, God.
So, and that's so true, right? It's
it is.
The sky is falling. People will believe you, right? But if you say, oh, by the way, the sky is falling, nobody will believe you, right? You have to shout, right? Nobody will believe
from the mountaintop.
Shout, right? Nobody will believe you unless it's like a catastrophe, right?
Yeah.
It's called. I was reading Patrick Moore, right? And he was saying that it's now CAGW, catastrophic anthropological climate change. They've added an extra C to the front. At least the quote unquote deniers, right? Yep. And I get called like a science denier all the time on Twitter, right? It's like, I believe completely about science.
This has been great. I really enjoyed the wide-ranging topics and talking with you. It was very enjoyable for me.
Okay, thank you.
Any parting thoughts that you have that you want to impart on the listeners? Well,
as I say, the climate, this environmentalism, right? It's causing trillions and trillions of dollars of damage to your economy, basically. Like if you add up all the day rates and whatnot that that you're causing, and it's just not you don't the people who believe in it. Like I don't blame the average person, right? Because they believe what they hear on the media, right? I believe the people in the know that are promoting this stuff, right? The fear mongers, right? The Greenpeaces, the people at the top of these chains who are promoting these things, right? They know better, but yet they ignore the truth, right? Like the people at Greenpeace know that nuclear does not produce greenhouse gases, and yet they have on their website that nuclear is one of the worst greenhouse emitters, right?
Yeah.
They have on their website that 90,000 people died from radiation at Chernobyl. That is a blatant lie.
Yeah.
And there's really like 31 people died and maybe 120 people in total, right? And they have like numbers of 90,000, right? Because they don't care about the truth, right?
Yep.
And I was reading that Greenpeace has very little concern about the truth, right? All they care about is donations, and they will change and alter the story based upon what they believe is the hot topic of the day, whether it is GMOs, which are perfectly safe, right? Or whatever else. They just change their ideology based upon what they can get for donations. And I was also reading that there was an episode of Madam Secretary, for instance, right, which is so true, right?
Yep.
Is that a lot of the companies, a lot of these environmental groups, right, they know that nuclear is beneficial, but they will never admit it because many of their donors are opposed to nuclear, right? So they have to make the narrative or their thing match what they believe they can get for donations and what they believe that their clientele believes, right? So they alter their storyline to match what they believe that they're, not they don't care about the truth, right? That's the problem, is that the truth is and there's so much fake information and fake news out there, right? It's just and
so avoid the mainstream media and seek out the truth. That's the moral of it.
The truth is out there, like X-Files.
Just go find it. Hey, Dale, thank you, man. I really appreciate it.
Right,
okay,
thanks.
We'll talk later.
Right.
Okay, thanks. Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to Dale. I did. I just let him talk. I love listening to Dale, and there's sometimes I got a ton of questions. Other times somebody just has really good thoughts, and I like to just let them speak their mind and share their views. And I hope you're able to take a bunch of insights out of the conversation with Dale. Hope you have a good week. And next week we're going to start our energy journey. So have a great week, and I'll talk with you next week. Thanks.
The information presented on Talking Stocks Over a Beer is the opinion of its hosts and guests. You should not base your investment decisions solely on this broadcast. Remember, it's your money and your responsibility.